Every AI you've used is quietly boxing your thinking in. It makes you reason like everyone else and prevents you from coming up with original insights. However, there is a way to fix this. And it's not about prompt engineering. The problem is with how AI is actually designed. If you use it to think, to research, to write, to create, it affects every output that you're going to get. You want to get truly original insights? Then you have to start using it differently. I'm the developer behind InfraNodus, a knowledge graph tool that I've been building for the last 10 years. And the approach that I'm going to show you uses network graphs to help solve this problem of AI boxing your thinking in. Here's the thing. When you ask AI to generate an insight based on a certain context, it does something very predictable. It takes a representation of this context that it has in its multi-dimensional vector space, something like what you're seeing right now on your screen in a simplified way, and then it extracts high probability patterns, topical clusters, the most obvious relations, and then it uses them to generate the most predictable outcome. This is how it actually works, and this is how it produces such impressive results. This actually works really great for summaries, but it's terrible for insights, because insight, by definition, is something that you haven't thought of yet. It lives in the gaps, in the connections that haven't been made yet. Do you see these gaps? AI doesn't look there. It cannot, because there is no information there. But that's where the interesting insights are hiding. Also, do you see the periphery of the graph? So the AI is not going to try to focus on these smaller clusters and then attempt to jump out beyond the limits of this graph. It's going to try to bring you back to the center, because this is what it's designed to do. This is how it produces the most plausible outcome. However, when you want to generate an interesting idea, you actually want to jump outside of this cluster to connect your ideas to the outside world. And this is not just about the AI. This is how human thinking also works most of the time. We gravitate towards what is familiar. This is called confirmation bias. The entire internet, search results, recommendation algorithms, social media feeds are trying to push us towards statistical center. So what you need to do is to point AI's attention to those gaps, to make it think beyond the periphery of the knowledge that it has, to try to remove the most obvious concepts and reveal the insights that are hiding underneath, under the surface layer of ideas. How do you do that? This is where the graph comes in. Instead of using the chat interface, like I do here, you represent this text as a knowledge graph, where the nodes form the topical clusters. And then you can use the graph to see which topics are not yet connected. This is where the insights are going to be hiding. There is no AI used here yet. It's just pure algorithm that shows you the structure of your thinking and reveals what's missing. Then we can focus our attention on those blind spots and try to ask questions that will make us connect them in new and interesting ways. We still rely on what's inside the text because we're touching upon the topics that we've been talking about, but we just try to connect them in new ways and to come up with original ideas this way. This is where originality comes from. This is where we will have our little eureka moment, because we will come up with something that we haven't thought of before. We can also generate these gaps by removing the most obvious ideas in order to reveal what's hiding underneath. It's like slicing off the top layer of discourse to see the more nuanced topical clusters, the more nuanced concepts that are hiding underneath. This is where we will find stuff that AI would never find, because it would just disregard them as something not relevant to the central ideas. AI will not show you all these hidden ideas, because this is not what the reinforcement learning is rewarding it for. Finally, what the graph shows you is that you are in a thinking bubble, because it visualizes the structure of your thought and shows you that it has limitations. So the most logical thing to do if you want to transcend this limitation is to focus on a certain edge and then try to see how you can develop your thought further and connect it to other contexts. And this is exactly what the graph can help you do. The ideas would still be connected to the main discourse, because you're starting from something that is relevant to this particular context, but you're also trying to escape and connect to something that doesn't exist here yet. Let me show you how this works in practice using a real example. In fact, I'm going to go very meta, and I'm going to use this very video as an example, because you just heard it, you have in your mind what I've been talking about, so you can understand how the different approaches produce different results. So first, I'm going to put the script of everything that I said so far into ChatGPT, and I'm going to ask it to generate an interesting insight for me from this text. Okay, so this is the text of this very video. I'm putting it in a standard ChatGPT, and I'm asking it to just give me an insight. And it provides a nice insight. It tells me that AI doesn't just centralize ideas, it outsources curiosity. But it's kind of generic. Like, of course, I said that already, that this is what AI does. So it didn't come up with anything new. You see, it kind of repeats what I just said, rephrases it in a nice way, maybe making it more concise and precise. But, it doesn't give me a new idea for how I can apply this knowledge and develop it further. And this is where the problem is, because it just tries to take this text that I just had, everything I said so far, and then generate something that will be plausible, that would make sense, maybe a little insight here and there, but it doesn't come up with something new. Now, let's see what happens when we put it into the InfraNodus graph and visualize it as a network. All right, so here I have the same text that I had in ChatGPT, but visualized as a knowledge graph. I can get a quick visual overview of the main topics, which I already know, but now if I want to generate insight, I go into the content gaps tab here in the analytics panel, and I ask it to show me the gap. What are the topics that I could connect in more interesting ways? And here the first gap is between media algorithms and graph knowledge. So one cluster is where I was talking about how the same algorithms are used to provide us recommendations or social media feeds. And then another cluster where I was talking about how graphs can be used to solve this problem. But it asks me to think now, okay, is there a way how graphs could be used to also fix those algorithms? And already just by looking at this gap, and we're not using AI here, I'm already understanding that, okay, there is some way that those graphs could be applied to change the way these recommendation algorithms work. For example, also providing a recommendation service that would focus not on what all of your friends like, but rather finding the gaps that you're not thinking about and providing you some recommendations or content that would be interesting for you because it touches upon the topics that you are already engaged with, but that connect them in new interesting ways. So you see, I can already generate an insight just by looking at the graph. But as this video is about AI, we also have an AI feature inside InfraNodus that can generate a research question based on this gap. So what it's going to do is that it's going to feed this gap into the AI module here. And then you see it says, okay, generate an interesting question that would connect those topics together. And then it provides me a question that says, how can interactive knowledge graphs enhance media algorithm recommendations by identifying and visualizing confirmation bias, blind spots, leveraging graph-based insights learning to uncover latent connections between familiar concepts. So here it proposes me a question that can help me connect these two topics together in an interesting way and generate an insight. And this is why we actually encourage our users to use the question button first, because of course you could click on the idea and it would come up with something, but it's much more interesting to use the graph and AI to help you think better, to have it think with you and not for you. And this is actually the same way that it's used in coding. You're not just asking AI to vibe code an app for you and deploy it. In fact, if you want to do it right, you're asking it to generate a plan, and then you review every step that it's making so that you understand what's happening, that you can correct what's happening, that you can add your own input, and then the quality of the code and of the product that you generate this way is much better. So it's exactly the same approach, but applied to your thinking. First, you look at the gap, you try to think of the connection yourself, then you generate a question, and then you can think of an answer. For the sake of the demonstration, I'm also going to show you that you can use AI to generate an answer as well if you want to push yourself to think in this direction. So it's going to give you some idea that you can start with. And here it's providing a response. It says that interactive knowledge graphs can reveal confirmation biases within media algorithms by visualizing connections between familiar topics, by identifying less obvious pathways and gravitating away from familiar concepts that reinforce existing beliefs. Those graphs harness graph-based learning to bridge gaps in understanding. So it's basically telling us that we could use knowledge graphs to visualize the recommendations that we provide to our users and to steer them to pay more attention to the gaps. And we can either do it explicitly through an interface or also implicitly by introducing the same kind of approaches into the algorithms that provide recommendations. So imagine if the next time you log into your Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you would actually be seeing recommendations that you are not expecting to see because they're bridging the gaps between your different interests. I think that would be amazing. And this is exactly what this insight is providing us. So it took the text, the idea that I've been thinking about, and now it tries to see how to apply it in other contexts. And this is exactly where those insights emerge. In fact, now I'm running it on the GPT 4.0 model because it's just the fastest, but I have some previous conversations I did with this graph using GPT 5, and it even provided a bullet point implementation plan for me on how I can make this happen through the interface, through the infrastructure. So it's really great because you can almost feed this back into your software development agent, and then it will generate some new part of your software that will perform exactly this new way of providing recommendations to your users. So it's really great because it's directly actionable. You can just copy and paste it from here and then feed it to your agent, and it's going to work. And the best thing about it is that it also can work inside your own LLM. So you don't have to use the graph. You can use ChatGPT like I do in this case, and you simply connect it to your MCP server here. I cannot do it right now here because it's not allowing me to, but you can see that I actually fed this whole text into ChatGPT, and then I connected it to my InfraNodus MCP server. So it made a request to the tool that's called Generate Research Ideas, where it sent this very text with some parameters. And then what InfraNodus does is that it basically provides all this in the background, and then it gives the responses, which are then integrated into your conversation. So for example, here, once ChatGPT received this special insight based on identifying content gaps, and these were, I think, different content gaps because you can switch between them and generate a few insights based on a few gaps. What it came up with was actually pretty interesting because it says, okay, the text is arguing that originality is not a generation problem, but an attention allocation problem. And they say that original ideas do not come from asking AI for better answers, they come from giving it a better map of where not to look by default. And it's interesting because it reframes knowledge graphs from being descriptive tools into cognitive steering mechanisms. So it's exactly this thing. It took everything I said so far, and then it said, okay, look, you can actually be using knowledge graph to steer different tools or your own thinking into new directions by shifting your attention to the stuff that are not obvious. So this is a much higher quality insight than just saying that AI is problematic, how it did here, and that it outsources curiosity. It sounds nice, it's good as a slogan, but it doesn't really give me any actionable insight. Whereas here, it's almost explaining to me how I can use my approach to actually implement a real change into the way we consume and deliver information. So that I find very interesting, and you can use it inside Claude or ChatGPT via MCP server, and then you will have access to all the same logic, so you don't have to use the graph in this way. Another approach that I want to demonstrate is that you can actually cut off the top layer of the most obvious concepts to reveal what's hiding underneath. This is another approach that I find very interesting because basically in this text so far that I had at the very beginning of this video, I was talking about AI and thinking in text. So what you can do is just like select all of those obvious concepts, remove them from the graph, slice off the top layer, and then you will see that other clusters come to the surface and become visible. So you will see that as you do this a few times, there's actually a button here that allows you to slice off the top layers. You will have different topical clusters generated. For example, now we have a cluster on social dynamics that we didn't have yet, or learning tools. So then we can go into content gaps and then highlight some of the interesting gaps here, for instance, social dynamics and network solutions, and then generate new insights based on those latent gaps that were not visible at first, and then we will come up with even more original ideas that are based on more specific topical clusters that we identified by slicing off the top layer of ideas. So this is another approach that the graphs can be very helpful with. Let me show you one last method that I find very interesting, and it is based on transcending the structure of this bubble that we're thinking in and trying to see how it connects to the outside context. And we do that by selecting a smaller cluster at the periphery. For instance, we have one here, attention reveal. It's a little bit at the edge of the graph, right? And what we can do here is once we selected it, we go into the AI module, and then we ask the AI to generate an idea that is based on this peripheral cluster, but that tries to connect it to the outside world, to think beyond the limits of this knowledge, right? So what it's going to do is that it's going to generate an idea that will be based on this cluster, that will relate to the structure of the text, but that will try to take it further and propose another perspective to see how it can be developed further. And it's quite interesting here. So for example, if we're talking about this attention reveal and how shifting attention using the knowledge graph helps us reveal the blind spots, here it's telling us, okay, so to transcend the current discourse, let's rethink attention as a dynamic bridge rather than a focus point. When we shift from viewing attention as a way to illuminate obvious things and instead see it as an explorative force that actually actively identifies blind spots within clusters, it transforms into more than just perception, it becomes creation. This reframe allows us to view gaps not as absences, but as fertile grounds where unexpected insights can emerge, fostering originality beyond predefined patterns. Consider how this approach might alter our understanding of algorithmic predictions, moving from certainty in output to embracing uncertainty for discovery beyond the known graph structure. So it's actually quite good because it's telling us, look, what if you don't optimize for coherence, but you optimize for gaps? And maybe this is the way that the temperature setting could work in AI. You know, that we don't think that hallucination is something bad. We can maybe have some mechanism that makes sure that the output that AI produces contains a sufficient number of gaps to be inspiring for us to put our attention into them in order to develop the discourse in ways that are interesting and that don't confirm the already existing truths that we already know. So this could be a really nice approach, and this is how you do this through identifying those clusters and then trying to transcend them further. By the way, if you use this module, you can use it with GPT-4o because it's a little bit old, but it's actually quite creative. Or alternatively, you can also try to use a model like GPT-5 Mini or Claude Opus 4.5, and then you will get much more detailed explanations of how you can actually implement it. So it really depends on the level of detail that you would like to have from your system. All right, so I hope you find this demonstration interesting. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you tried. As I said, you can use it both inside InfraNodus itself. You can also connect it via an MCP server to your favorite LLM application. I have another video where I explain how this MCP server works that I will link to. And also let me know if you have any questions, comments, feedback. I'll be happy to answer in the comments below the video. Thank you very much.